Okay, so hi everyone. I hope you enjoyed this really short break, but now we're going to start with the presentation. So this is Tsai, lead architect from Deutsche Telekom, and I am Adrián Gallego, also from Deutsche Telekom, but just a 5G architect. So this is the topic that we are going to present today, the Tower of Babel, and I would like you to take a look at it. So as you can see, it's really crumbling, and what we wanted to reflect here is the complexity and the difficulties that we have as operators when we try to integrate disaggregated solutions and all this wide range of solutions that we have seen all along the day into our network, into our tower. So what we are going to talk is, hey, let's try to take one step back and see how we can simplify this integration and managing operations within our tower, so that all these stakeholders that you can see on the image that are talking different languages and that are using different solutions can coexist under the same roof, under the same tower. So please accompany us on this journey, and let's see how did we get here. A couple of years ago, this concept of softwareization stepped in, and we were somehow promised that everything was going to be much simpler, so that we were going to have much quicker innovation cycles, it was going to be easier to get our products to the market, and overall, that we're going to have more control over our resources, meaning that also we will be more efficient in terms of energy and cost consumption. But now, let me ask you, how many mobile operators do we have here in the room? Okay, good to see. So, how many of you experienced that ideal concept? So, how many of you really thought, hey, I am trying to integrate this, and I got that, exactly that? Probably one or none, yep. So the point is, what we realized is, hey, when we try to integrate this kind of technologies, try-down concept into the operator network, it's really complex. Why? Because as you have seen along the whole day, there are many different solutions, and we need to deal with all of them at the same time. So when we try to integrate that, it's really cumbersome, meaning that also trying to manage the relationships between those components, it's really complex. And we realize that we are not flexible enough to do it, and in some cases we also lack the experience or the knowledge to do it. So we start analyzing, hey, what might be going on? What would be the root cause of this? And we don't believe it's a technological problem. Again, if not tens, there are hundreds of tools out there that are allowing us to do that. So we believe that the problem is coming from trying to converge, trying to do all these kind of operations in an homogeneous or at least in a similar and simpler way. So that is where we start trying to rebuild the tower. So that's the reason why the tower cracked down. And now let's try to rebuild it. So we are going to have different stages from the planning phase, building phase, and running phase. We'll look over all of them, and we'll start brick by brick rebuilding the tower. In all of them, we are going to have two main pillars, simplicity and sustainability. First of all, let's try to think about, hey, let's imagine if we could describe any given component as a building block. Probably, if we use that approach, our architects, when they are trying to design any given architecture with different components, with different vendors, it would be much easier for them to do it. So how can we achieve that? Let's imagine this kind of manifest. This is just an exemplary one, okay? But let's say that instead of just focusing on describing the configuration of a given component, we could also describe what are the dependencies or the relationships with other components in any domain of our network, talking about the access domain, transport, or even in the core. What if we could describe that just on a declarative manner as we are doing here? That would really ease things up. Again, what if we can also establish sustainability by design on the configuration, so that we can even say our component has an equals core or has this kind of configuration that makes it a more performance-based or more sustainable-based? that will also set up one thing and one pillar to see that sustainability is there from the beginning. Of course, if we are dealing with this kind of abstract manifest, it would be needed to explain how to talk with this kind of component so that we can define endpoints and which kind of protocols are needed to speak with these given components. And finally, metrics. Metrics should be there. We need the data. So what if we're also trying to get sustainability metrics from the beginning so that we can get what is the percentage of the desired energy source that should be there. Let's say that I want to have a component which is using an 8% of solar energy. If it's not there, then I would get it down. We can do that. And the main point here also is, as you can see on the lower side, that we expect the vendors to be the ones providing this, so that we all use the same approach, the same declarative approach, and we have this kind of configuration from the beginning. This will really help us to get rid of the first pain point, dealing with the components and all the dependencies between those components in our networks. Second pain point would be, hey, now we know how to describe a component. We know how to relate them, how to talk with them, and what metrics can I expect from those components. But now I need to integrate that. I need to deploy that in my network, in my infrastructure. So how can we do that? How can we simplify that process? What if we were able to get this kind of component manifest and then automatically derive what are the requirements for a given infrastructure? Here we are talking about maybe hardware, maybe OS, or maybe BIOS requirements. So usually, if you are an operator, you're probably aware of this, but we have this core network function which is called the UPF, the user plane function, which normally comes with lots of hardware requirements, either hardware acceleration or hardware offloading. What if, just by the component manifest, we were able to know what kind of hardware requirements are there and where to deploy that specific CNF in our infrastructure? Of course, for that, we will also need some validation functions, so that once we automatically extract those requirements, we can also get it into our infrastructure optimization process, and then finally provision it into our infrastructure. So up to this point, we have added 2 bricks in order to rebuild the tower. First of all, simplifying how we describe components, and secondly, how we can provision them, how can we deploy them into any given infrastructure. Now I leave the room to my colleague, Bernard.
Thank you very much. So don't move on. I just want to highlight one thing. We're not talking about tools, deliberately not talking about tools, because what we're facing is not a technology problem. It's not about having the right tool, but about the way we're working together, the same as in the Tower of Babylon context. People were not agreeing on how to do certain things, and that's why they were coming up with different concepts, different data models, and suddenly we've got myriads of tools which we need to integrate, and we're extremely slow in doing that. So what I'd like to highlight here is that if we're onboarding a network function, we typically have the situation that the network function providers tell us, we've tested this solution in a very, very specific context, and if we have to transfer it to another cloud, then we'll have to do the whole Q&A process over and over again, and it'll cost millions. Now, what we've seen when comparing the different network solutions, that 80% of the requirements were very much looking the same, actually. Yeah, so the 20%, of course, were differentiating, so that's fine, but 80%, we need multiple network interfaces, we need to talk about BGP, we need to talk about certain kernel drivers. Those things are standard mechanisms which we should be able to manage. And just imagine that all the different telco operators would now come together and say, let's take our manifests, let's take our requirements, pipe them through AI, and categorize the infrastructure requirements and see what is the common denominator, which we can see here, and put that into a template where we say, anytime we get sort of an infrastructure requirement from our vendors, we would ask them to put that into that template so that we can automatically, based on that template, provision the infrastructure. So this is just an example of how data structures and the way we are collaborating is of the essence if we want to really become more effective. If we go to the next example, please. Next example is, how do we do GitOps? I like this presentation from Guillaume, saying GitOps is the way to go. We agree with that. But the way of how we interact with all the different configuration management tools, with the northbound interfaces, etc., is still not very clear. And therefore, we can look into what do we do in the context of our CI/CD processes and agree on certain fundamental activities which we have to do over and over again. First step is we need to agree on how do we do sourcing. How do we get the resources from the vendors, make sure that they're properly signed, that we can sort of make sure that the versioning information is there, etc., etc. Second step is how do we do configuration management. We've got tons of configuration tools in place. How does that fit together with the config map approach or GitOps approach? Here, sort of, we need to have a common understanding of how these tools should ideally work together. Integration, if we have to actually then sort of bundle certain activity, certain resources such as Helm charts, images, secrets, etc., we need to have mechanisms where we say this is the common way of how to do that. Same for distribution, same for deployment, same for validation. I don't want to go through every one of those elements, but it's more about agreeing on how we do that, not about what kind of tool we're using here, and what are the responsibilities of the vendors, the telco operators, the integrators, etc. And coming to a conclusion of how we want to do that would be extremely helpful for us. We go to the next topic. Lifecycle management. Yeah, we know that as a telco operator, we want to have these 5 nines of service availability. At the same time, we're now in the software world. Software is changing constantly. So we're in the flexibility, stability dilemma, saying, do we want to be flexible or do we want to be stable? And of course, utmost priority for us has stability, but we believe that based on the mechanisms of a CI/CD procedures, of this sort of lifecycle management, we would be able to account for how do we ensure under the constraint of service availability that we can change over the time. And one major ingredient for that is to look at our network solutions and decompose our network solutions into the components, which we've been just mentioning, and the relationships between those components. So if you had the chance to look here at Wim's presentation regarding how to talk about relationships in choreography, what we would love to see is that we all agree on what are the component lifecycle states and transitions, and at the same time also do that for the relationships. How can relationships be established, be sort of broken up if we do an upgrade, for instance, etc. Also having lifecycle management in the relationship part would be essential here. Yeah, so coming to an agreement for that would be great. And finally, if we go to the next slide, what we just want to promote is we don't need more tools. Yeah, it's great to have the technological evolution. We don't want to miss out on that. And it's great to have so many sort of communities working on the different solutions, contributing to the evolution of our capabilities. But we also need a consolidation phase to say what are the best practices on top of which we can then further on build our capabilities. And therefore, we would love to see sort of a community effect coming from the telco operators working together and saying, look here, if we now bring together all our best practices, we believe we could have a great idea of how to specify the infrastructure templates, which we could hand over to the vendors, for instance. It would be a great idea if you could have a common GitOps approach where we talk about the different stages which we need to go through and how the roles and responsibilities should look like. It would be great if we would have a common way of how we do lifecycle management and then make use of that when we're talking about observability. So in this sense, it's not about establishing a new community and increasing this language plethora of different opportunities of open source communities, but more about what are the best practices which we believe will allow for covering 80% of our requirements. And here I was just wondering if there would be also more operators, more vendors wanting to contribute to this idea and saying we are sort of making use of this idea as a foundation for the evolution. Because currently, if we don't get that right, all the other things on top, like data and AI and agentic, etc., are sort of lacking the foundation for evolving more quickly. And that's sort of one of the dilemmas which we have currently. And actually with that, we're happy to have any questions from your side. Would there be any questions? Yeah.
Could you maybe take the microphone?
Hi, thanks for an interesting presentation. So my question is, it all sounds really logical. It all sounds really what we need, but what do the vendors say? Have you talked to vendors? Are they able to do this? Are there concerns or?
Yeah. So I didn't quite get the first part, but the concerns I can of course mention. But the first part was what? The values or?
What was their response? The vendors, you know.
Okay. So the difficulty for the vendors is that they have to maintain a lot of legacy. Yeah. So it's not like that they can simply say, we're going to go for a great new world. And so therefore they have to maintain this legacy. They've got their procedures in place where they've got Q&A, etc. And it would be very difficult for them to say, Deutsche Telekom's approach is the best, or the Orange's approach is the best, or Vodafone's approach is the best. Yeah. And then support that, because for every sort of those approaches, they would need to adopt sort of their sort of quality assurance strategies, etc. And this is also costly for them. So my sort of idea would rather be to say, if we as telco operators could try to streamline our requirements, go back to the essentials of what we really need, and sort of speak up with a common voice, instead of being in 10,000 communities and then being a little bit diluted in our way of how we express our concerns, that would be helpful also for the vendors. Yeah? That would be one of the ideas which we sort of have. Otherwise, we are always going to have this matching of sort of existing customer base, sort of telco-specific context, which is going to be very difficult. Okay.
There is already the NGM and Clarity Manifesto and the Telco User Group's white paper, both of them written by operators along the same lines. Are these not good enough, or there is not enough consensus behind them, or what's the problem?
I think we need to. I think it's a good start, but I think we need to do better. Yeah, that means sort of now taking one step further. We need to talk about data structures. We need to talk about how we manipulate data structures in the course of life cycle. Yeah, that means sort of not only have the general ideas of what the principles are, but then tell us, sort of talk about how do we represent relationships, how do we represent infrastructure requirements, and put that into a structure which is really machine readable, automatable, and which would allow us to really sort of streamline our procedures dramatically. So going one step deeper would be great. Yes.
Excellent ideas, and a follow-up question to the previous one. And do you have a proposal already ready that you...
Just a simple idea. Again, just reiterating what I've just mentioned. No. I want to start simple. Yeah, I don't want to create a new community, but I would ask Vodafone, Telekom Italia, Orange, etc., to join together and say, look here, we're going to propose a procedure of how you can capture your Kubernetes manifests and your sort of requirements documents, your CIQs, and put that into a sort of an AI-driven prompt engineered process where you say, take this input, and please, out of that input, at the end, generate an infrastructure template which is reusable. Then we bring all those templates sort of from the different operators together and say, now take these templates and derive out of that a common template. As a process of converging our understanding, streamlining this approach of which we are currently having. We are drowning in sort of so many different individual silo solutions that we forget the big picture. And that's why AI, for instance, could help us here in working on that.
I agree. This is an excellent idea. We wanted to work something very similar in Nefio, you know. That's also why I'm asking if you already have something that, for example, we can try out in Nefio or in an open source project.
Yes. So I didn't want to sort of say, well, let's use Nefio or let's use sort of GSMA or whatever type of NGMA, whatever type of organization. I was just wanting to have the operators step up and say, look here, if we consolidate our requirements, it would be much easier for the vendors to support us. Yeah?
Thanks.
Sorry.
I agree with you that operators have to be one group and speak in one voice, but someone has to be in a lead or a community to be in a lead to start to gather them. Is there any initiative to have this?
So we would volunteer to at least collect the people who are interested in that. Yeah? But sort of
peer with the team.
Yeah, so we've got the QR code sort of in the presentation. If you look into the schedule, you will also see sort of how you can contact us. So sort of please feel free to reach out to us. We will also reach out to our peers in the industry and try to bring these ideas together. Again, what we're not intending to do is create a new community. So just to be very sure about that. Yeah, but exactly, just to sort of foster this sort of alignment procedure. Yeah.
I have one more question in regards to this working together with multiple telco operators. Because to my knowledge, there is, over the last 10 years, there have been like so many initiatives doing exactly that. Like Telekom Infra project was basically targeting this idea, right? Bringing together multiple telco operators, defining their requirements towards infrastructure, coming up with a common idea. There's like even older things like the Broadband Forum, 3GPP, doing that for very specific topics. Why would you think that doing that again or in a different way would now be more successful?
Good point, good question. I was actually astonished when I did my first experiments with sort of a prompt engineered sort of consolidation approach, where I said, look here, let's take all those manifests and try to see how we can consolidate these ideas, that the conversion process was very, very fast. That means sort of, I believe AI can help us here. There needs to be a willingness and a pain to be felt by the operators to say, look, we need to change something. Because I believe in the first phase, we were more exploring all those virtualization, cloudification technologies and saying, great technology, let's try to see how far we get. But we're also feeling the pain of that we're not really fast enough, that we're not really adopting it sort of more efficient enough. So I believe the pain level is there. And I also believe that the mechanisms which we could use by sort of streamlining the mechanisms of AI would help us to converge much faster. Yeah, so I believe the convergence speed is the critical aspect which we need to think about. If we introduce a process which is rather tedious and long and where we only meet, let's say, monthly or weekly, then it's going to be slow. But if we've got a procedure where we say, based on certain steps, we can generate results which then sort of very quickly converge to a common understanding, then I believe we might be in the position to come up with certain solutions in a faster way. We'll have to test drive it. Yeah? No guarantee, but we have to test drive it. That's the basic idea.
Also, if you have seen today, there was a really common pattern with the previous presentation. So everyone was talking about GitOps, everyone was talking about building these communities. So the message is there. We know what we want to achieve, but we still don't know how to reach there, how to be there. So that would be the main point, I think, to build this kind of common understanding and common, not community, I don't know how to call it, but common group. So yeah, that would be it.
Thank you.
Yeah, one more.
Yeah, thanks. So you said that there's AI which can help us to collaborate, but I think it's not about the technology, it's about the collaboration. So we have already so much technologies there. As the guy said, we have Etsy, 3GPP, Nefio, and then Camara today. So we have lots of technology already there. So how do you think that AI is going to help us? It's not, I think it's not about technology, it's just about collaboration, integration, and I don't know how we are going to achieve this, and every year we see the same talks, same topics, same discussions going on in every KubeCon, but in the end, we achieve nothing in case of telcos.
There's a slight difference which I'd like to mention here. Typically, we're talking about technology when we're saying, how do I observe, for instance, a Kubernetes deployment? How do I deploy something? Sort of for those things, we're talking about the tools which we're using. What I want to now sort of promote is the idea of sort of making use of tools for converging our understanding, converging our requirements, converging the way we sort of operate. That means it's not about the tools which we are going to use in the lifecycle, but more about how do we come to a common requirements document, how do we come to a common infrastructure template, etc., and make use of tools for that. So that might be a little bit of difference here.
Okay, then I think then we have to standardize some of our approach, like how we are going to move forward. Like there should be some standardized approach which should be followed by every country.
And to be honest, I'm happy with 80% agreement.
Yeah.
I'm not wanting to go for 100% agreement. 80% is enough. And with a sort of a rough tooling which we already have sort of available, then sort of we would be able to converge at least to these 80% rather quickly.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the good points. Yeah, thank you.
So that's it. Thank you very much.